a privilege to be here. I'm really, really excited to be in the presence of so many people who are dedicated to changing the world for the better. It's a real honor. I'm excited to be in Liverpool for the first time. And I think that we're living right now in a particularly important time because I don't think that there has been in our history a more complex or important challenge than climate change. And this is something I kind of took for granted until around last year. Just after my 18th birthday, this is a year or two ago, after my third expedition to the North Pole, I came up with this idea for an expedition to the South Pole. Ended up being a two-part journey. First, a 1,900-kilometer crossing of the Antarctic continent in a custom-built truck to conduct research through cores and samples, shallow cores on the surface of Antarctica. And the second part was this 560-kilometer or so trek from the coast of Antarctica. Wanted to do the fastest trek to the South Pole. And at the time, I didn't really realize this, but what we did was we wanted to bring the climate change debate into a little bit more of a relevant circle, a bit more productive. And we built this studio in London, this television studio. We did a broadcast show every morning and did live streaming video from the expedition, but more importantly, we had these debates with experts and policy leaders and people who worked in the private sector to get a lot of different points of view on the issue of climate change. And I thought that we had plenty of time. I mean, we were gone for well over a month or so, about a month. And we thought we could cover some ground. Well, the reality is when I came back, we had just about scratched the surface of even talking about how climate change is affecting society today, whether that's the way that agriculture is changing, the way that people in different cities around the world are being affected, extreme weather, how it's going to affect business, how we can make renewable energy competitive in today's world. And this is when I really started to think a little more deeply about why this was so complicated. And it's not actually, for me, it wasn't obvious. It was, why is this such a complicated challenge to solve when, in fact, we have done a lot harder things before? In the space of 70 years, one lifetime, we went from the Wright brothers' first flight of an airplane ever to landing on the moon. That was unbelievable, seemingly far harder than using cleaner sources of energy to power the world. So why is this so complicated? Why is it so hard to do? And it's not all about the vested interests of an industry, because after all, there have been plenty of different opportunities for us to fix problems based on our behaviors. In the past, we had plenty of different issues. There was the ozone hole, there was lead pollution, smoking, acid rain, air pollution. All of these things were challenges that were based on our way of life and that actually ended up being, to a large extent, actually solved through the use of regulating the way that, or changing the way that we live, not necessarily for the worse, but actually for the better. And so I think what's particularly complicated about this is not so much that we're simply reliant on fossil fuels, but let's remember this is an issue that we've known about for decades. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was formed in 1988. That's 6 years before I was born. This was a campaign issue for George Bush, President Bush, who, and I'm talking about the senior one, the one who was elected in the 1980s. So, first of all, one of the complexities is, it's a stressor, it's a threat multiplier, it's not an event, it's a process. And so it takes things that everyone's already heard of and has already experienced and makes them more severe or more frequent or a combination of both, floods, droughts, hurricanes, wildfires, this kind of thing. And with ozone, what we were able to do is point at depleting ozone and say that is the cause of an increasing susceptibility to skin cancer. Or with air pollution, we can say that is the one thing that can cause respiratory illness. With greenhouse gases, it's a little more complicated. We can't necessarily point to a hurricane and say that would never have happened. But we can say with absolute certainty that climate change is making extreme weather around the world more severe and sometimes more frequent. The other thing, of course, is that it's statistical, it's gradual, it's hard to experience on a personal level until it really happens to you. And it affects communities differently around the world. And as a result, the temptation is to not think about it. And the temptation is to base views on personal experience. I'm tempted, when I look out the window, to base my point of view, my world view on what I see. And so, if it's snowing outside, and it's been snowing for a while, and I wasn't one that actually experienced Hurricane Sandy or Typhoon Haiyan, or any one of these, any number of extreme weather events in the last couple of years, then I'm tempted to think that it's not really going to be too much of an issue. Now, speaking of snowing, I wanted to, because I don't think I can really go over the sort of story of the expedition to the South Pole in the time that I have. I thought I might just talk about 3 lessons that I learned in the last year or so as it relates to the expedition. The first is, the future is closer than we think. And the reason I say that is because we tend, as people, to undervalue the future. We make decisions now without really contemplating the importance of what's going to happen in the future. So we make bad decisions now. We don't really think about the bad consequences that are happening in the future. That's basically the problem of climate change. And the same thing happens with good things. It's the same with positive outcomes. That's the whole issue of delayed gratification. You may have heard of the Stanford experiment. There was an experiment at Stanford University. It was led by Dr. Walter Mischel, a psychologist. And he got children into a room and he tested how they responded to a test on delayed gratification. What that means is, he said, you can have 1 cookie now, or you can have 2 cookies in 15 minutes. But you can't have the first cookie if you want the second one, if you want 2 in 15 minutes. Some were able to delay that so they can have the second one, and some caved, of course. And that's just a very oversimplified version of what we mean when we're talking about the tendency to not consider the value of the future. Now, for me, the way this applied the South Pole was, well, first of all, why were we there? You know, day to day, we don't think that the decisions we make are impacting us if yesterday seems a lot like today. And tomorrow is going to probably be very similar to today as well, broadly speaking. It's only when we look back do we realize that actually we're living in the world today that we thought we wanted to avoid back in 1988 when the IPCC was formed. So we're living in that world of risk now, and we have to consider how we respond to that and how we want to shape the future. For me, it was a matter of discipline. We were crossing Antarctica, the first part of our journey. We had to stop every 100 or so kilometers and drill a core and take samples. We had to take X number of samples. We had to do it in the right way. We had to package, label, collect. But it meant every time that we had to get out of the truck, everyone had to get out, everyone had to dig a huge hole or drill a core. Everyone had to spend hours doing this tedious work. And we could have very easily not done any of it because no one would have said a thing. If no one spoke up, then Ao, one of the team members who was responsible for the truck, the mechanic, a wonderful, talented guy, would have just kept on driving. And we would have gotten to the Ross Ice Shelf on the other side of Antarctica without ever having collected a single sample, and that would have been great because we wouldn't have had to leave the truck for a week and it would have been very comfortable. But the reality is that the minute that we reached the Ross Ice Shelf, we would know, we would regret it immediately. because we would have done nothing. It would have been a huge waste of an expedition. And it's not just about reaching the other side, it's about every time we miss a sampling site, we're already in that reality of feeling the consequences of decisions that we made in real time. And so eventually we managed to hit every site, but that's something that I'll talk about a little bit later. There was another consequence, I think that another issue with temptation and not considering the future so much was rationing calories. On the trek, we were walking a certain number of kilometers. We had X days of food and fuel to get there. We burned 12,000 calories a day. We only have the ability to take in 4,000 or so. And every time we stop, the overwhelming temptation is, I want to take more than is responsible because I'm hungry. But we know every calorie that is beyond what we can afford with the budget is a calorie that I'm going to deprive myself of later. And so, obviously, if we make irresponsible decisions in the short term, we won't have enough to finish the expedition, and something terrible could happen, or not, it depends. The second lesson that I think I learned was the importance of team accountability. And when we were out there, just to go back to this issue of who does the sampling and how and whether we do it and whether we can cave to the temptation of staying in the relatively warm truck compared to the minus 40 degrees of the outside, I think all of us have the best intentions, and the difference between doing it and not doing it was really the difference between knowing that someone was watching over us. I knew, in my case, I was responsible for the science. I was the one who had to radio into the front of the truck and say, we have to stop now. Everyone get out of the truck, put on your gloves. Nathan, who was another one of our team members, was sitting right in front of me. And he is a remarkable guy who actually worked for Willis Group, who was the title sponsor of the expedition. A few months ago, I had gone to Willis and say, I commit to doing this research. And the temptation is, I don't want to do it because it's cold outside, but Nathan was sitting right in front of me. And tacitly, he was holding me accountable for doing the job that I had committed to do. It's not that I didn't want to, it's that it made the decision a lot easier when I knew that I was being held accountable for my choices. It's also the same, I think, when it comes to climate change. I don't want to make links that are too tenuous, but at the same time, when we think about accountability in the issue of emissions of greenhouse gases, we're thinking about who is looking over our shoulders, who's ensuring that we make the right decisions and make the tough choices when they're upon us. And the answer is, sometimes there isn't. But what do we want? Is it the United Nations? Is it the CEO of the company? Is it international law? Is it the country's internal national laws? Is it all of them? So some people doubt the effectiveness of government policy, but at the end of the day, a lot of the time, it's the defining factor between the occasional right decision from people who really have the utmost commitment to the issue and the sort of the long-term two-cookie decision that really needs to be made being the rule and not the exception. And that's why I think that that things like the recent U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's policies to ensure that certain power stations, coal power stations, have a cap on their carbon emissions over the course of the next couple of decades, that's really important. And it's not token, because that is the first step towards laying the foundation for accountability and for responsibility in the sectors that are causing the challenges that we're facing today. And it places the burden of responsibility on the people that really do need to have it. Another issue with accountability is this picture up here. It seems kind of random, but I put it up here because collectively Doug and I faced a couple of injuries. Doug is the the teammate that I went to the South Pole with, he and I did the trek part together, just the two of us. And we had done these 3 expeditions to the North Pole together. And every single morning after the 5th day or so, I would beg him for a rest day. I said, we have to take a rest day. I'd say, we don't need to walk, we're doing well. I'd say, I can't do it, I need a rest. I'd say, my foot is too swollen to fit into the boot. For the most part, these were basically lies because, 2 minutes later, Doug would drag me out of the tent, and we'd be on our way. And so Doug was making sure that I was doing what I had committed to doing. Now, when it comes to the third lesson, I think that what I learned was a lot of the time, progress is happening when we don't really know it is or when we feel like it's not. And of course, I should put an asterisk below this and say, provided that we're really working hard towards this goal. I mean, if we slack off, nothing's going to happen. But what I mean by this is, one interesting example from the expedition is we start at around sea level. We have to get to 9,000 feet in elevation because the South Pole is on the polar plateau, this big icy desert on top of the ice sheet that covers Antarctica. The problem is there's this big obstacle in the way. It's the Transantarctic Mountains. It's what holds back the polar plateau. So to get to 9,000 feet, you have to get to the Transantarctic Mountains, and you have to climb somehow through the mountains. You have to find a pass, and then you have to go thousands of feet higher and get to the plateau. Then it becomes a little easier, supposedly. Or at least that's what I thought. And from the beginning of the expedition, we had this sort of amazing scenery in front of us, but for some reason, we would keep walking, and every morning, Doug would make a prediction, or we'd even make this prediction together. We'd say, by the end of the day, we're going to reach the base of the mountains. And then at the end of every single day, without fail, we did not reach the base of the mountains. And in fact, not just that, but the mountains seemed as far away as they were at the beginning of the day. They had not increased in size. They didn't seem less far away. They didn't seem more distinct. And I was wondering, what on earth is going on here? Well, the illusion here is that actually, because there are no other features, we don't know what size the mountains are. I don't know whether they were 100 meters or 1,000 meters or 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters. I couldn't tell. So we don't know how far they are, really. It's an illusion. And I stopped one day and I said, I think it was the third day, I said, Doug, I can't take this anymore. It's like we're walking into a postcard, Or I don't know if any of you have seen The Truman Show, where Jim Carrey at the end sails a boat into what he thinks is the sunset or thinks is the sky, and it actually is just basically a painting of the sky, and he crashes straight into it. That's kind of what it felt like. It's walking into a wall with a painting of mountains on it. And first of all, the immediate response that I got from Doug was, shut up, stop whining, keep walking, which is pretty much the only thing that he could really say at that time, because it's what we had to do. But at the end of the day, he had a point, which, first of all, if we do have to stare at this postcard, it's an absolutely magnificent, beautiful postcard that we should consider ourselves lucky to be in the presence of. But sometimes we have to take a bird's eye view. What the bird sees is steady progress. And for us, all that really mattered in the end was what is on the screen of our GPS. What can our legs actually handle? Is it 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours? We did on average 11 hours a day. When we finally did reach the base of the mountains, this was only in the last few hours did it get sort of bigger, did we see a shadow that was the first shadow other than our own that we saw in the space of quite a few days. And we looked back and saw all the progress that we had made in the last couple of days, and I think it was around 70 kilometers or maybe 12% or so of the journey. And as for the illusion, Doug pretty much just thought, well, let's just enjoy the view because it doesn't matter. the mountains are irrelevant to the progress that we're making. The progress issue with climate change is tougher because really we're not making the progress that we should be. Now let's not forget there has been some really positive steps. After Copenhagen in 2009, the big UN conference in Copenhagen, that was a bit of a disappointment. Everyone, or not everyone, but there was a lot of lost hope. And in the last couple of years, a lot of that hope has been revived. And there's this new sort of wave of optimism, but let's not forget, the developed world largely is decreasing carbon intensity. Some leaders have made some really important decisions, and we're starting to become a lot more united in the world as a people. So there is a reason to be optimistic. At the same time, we do have to shift it a little bit into a new gear. We need to shift into a paradigm where we realize that the world we live in is a very different world with a very different set of risks than the one that we used to. So progress isn't really, it's not automatic, is what I'm saying. It's not something that's inevitable. You have to make the decision. And for us, you know, there was a point during the expedition where Doug asked me, do you want to quit? Not once has he ever asked me this before. I think this was on day 14 or something, 15, 16. Never has he asked me this question, not in the 3 other expeditions that we did together. So that was a little disheartening, but I'm not going to lie, it was a time when the kilometers were sort of eluding us. We had some challenges, and at this pace that we were going, this new pace, a much slower pace, we weren't really going to make it at all, let alone break a speed record. We had to make a decision. The decision isn't so much do we want to quit, because where are we going to go? The decision is, can we get up every morning and believe that we can really make it to the pole? And Doug took this day by day. I couldn't really handle that. I had to sort of do it 10 steps at a time. I guess I thought that if I did 10 steps at a time, if I visualized the pole 10 steps away, there really wouldn't be an excuse. And we made it to the pole in 18 days, 4 hours, and 43 minutes on December 24th, Christmas Eve of last year. So I think that to finish off, because this really isn't about the expedition, we are so lucky in this world to have thousands of scientists telling us what's going on, dedicating their careers to making sure we're informed about what's happening in the world, making sure we can make the responsible decisions. And I think that if we focus on that, focus on past successes in similar problems, focus on accountability, responsible decision-making, integrating the real risks that are happening, then we stand a good chance of making climate change really a problem of the past. And as for what I think we can all do as individuals, we all have this incredible power now in this new generation to make our voices heard. And largely this is, I think, I would hope that you'd all agree, this is the collective power that all of us have in this room, is the ability to make our voices heard. And it's not that hard to do anymore, at least compared to what it used to be. And I think that if we can create a sort of communal commitment to doing that, and remember some of the biggest movements, or even electoral movements, electing people in positions of power, occur when the base is organized. So if we can organize ourselves as a generation, I think that we can be the one that really catalyzes the progress that needs to happen. So in conclusion, I really just want to say thank you. It's really a privilege to be here. I'm so excited to, first of all, be in front of you, to discover Liverpool for the first time, and to learn more about everybody's projects, to engage with the World Merit community, and it's a real privilege to be here. Thank you so much.